With UFC 308 finally in the books here, I wanted to go through and play matchmaker for every single fighter on the main card. So winners, losers, going to be talking about who I think they should be going up against next. Let's just start it off here with the guys in the main event. Obviously the biggest winner from this card, Ilia Topuria. The fight I want to see him take on is the Volkanovski rematch. I do think there are a few viable options. You could make the argument for Diego Lopez. I think you could make the argument for the Aljamain Sterling, Movsar Evloev winner, but I do think Volk has earned the rematch. I know some people get a little tired of these champions, like getting their immediate rematches. This one isn't immediate, but it is immediate for Volk. I do think, though, that Volk has such an impressive resume at featherweight. Ilia was his only loss in the 145 division. I do think he's earned that opportunity. Seems like that's the direction the UFC wants to go. Obviously, Volk wants that fight back, and then it seems like Ilia is also pretty cool with it. The problem here with Ilia is I just don't foresee anyone, at least in the short-term future here, beating him. He just seems so dominant. He's so well-rounded. You go out in your first two title fights and you KO Volkanovski and you KO Max Holloway. Volk had never been knocked out at 145. Max Holloway had never been knocked out, period. And he's not even really showing off his grappling, his jiu-jitsu. So as someone who likes Volk, I'm a fan of his. I don't want to see him go out and get KO'd again, but it does seem like it's the fight to make here. So for Ilia, I think it is the Volk rematch. Now looking at the losing side of that main event, for Max Holloway, it is kind of tough to pick a matchup here because there's going to be uncertainty on when he's returning. Obviously, he's going to need a layoff coming off, that knockout loss. There's also just going to be some uncertainty with the weight class. Based on his comments after the fight in the post-fight scrum, it seems like he's aiming for a returner on International Fight Week, and it seems like he wants to move up to lightweight, fight up at 155. So as of right now, it's tough to pinpoint one specific guy because so many things could change up there. 155, especially the big names, are kind of unbooked at this point. So I have three names to throw out there. I think we have a potential Conor McGregor rematch. Who knows what's going on with Conor here, but he's talked about wanting to go up against Max. If Conor somehow isn't booked by then, I think that could be interesting. I think Dustin Poirier, I think, Holloway mentioned it in the post-fight. I think Dustin might have mentioned it also. I think he was doing coverage for ESPN. But I think that's an interesting fight. Maybe the trilogy there obviously would be super fun. And I think Charles Oliveira, that rematch could also be interesting. If he doesn't beat Michael Chandler, he's not getting that next title shot. I think that could be a fun fight. Obviously, if Holloway's moving up, he's going to want the big names. I guess the question will also be is he just going for the money fights? Does he actually want to, create a path to the title? I do think most of the names I mentioned, could kind of do both. Also, maybe an outlier shot. If Paddy the Baddy somehow gets a fight kind of early on in 2025 and picks up a win, I could see them trying to jump him up, put him up against Max Holloway, two big names. So not saying that's super likely, but something to potentially look out for there. Now moving over to the co-main event, we had Khamzat Chimaev pulling off a dominant win over Robert Whittaker. Got it done in the first round, took him down super early on, found the submission. Seemingly broke, dislocated, fractured Robert Whittaker's jaw. You had his front three teeth were pushed all the way back into the back of his mouth. It was pretty disgusting, but a huge win for Khamzat Chimaev. And I think the question here for Khamzat is, are they going to throw him right into a title shot? And that's what I think they should do. I think the fight to make is Khamzat Chimaev taking on Dricus du Plessis for that middleweight title. I know some people are going to want to see the DDP Strickland rematch. For me, I look at what these guys have done, and the problem with Khamzat is that he hadn't had that signature win at 185, right? He had a couple fights early on in his run, but not against top names. His best win was against GM3. Then he was supposed to fight Paulo Costa. Costa pulls out. He gets a win over Usman, but it wasn't super convincing. Seemed like he was fading, and Usman isn't a middleweight. But he finally has that signature win. He completely ran through Robert Whittaker. No one's done Robert Whittaker like that up at 185. He has round two losses to Israel Adesanya and Dricus du Plessis, but no one up at middleweight has finished him in the first round. So that is a huge accomplishment for Khamzat Chimaev. And I think you contrast that with Sean Strickland, who lost the belt to DDP, albeit it was a close fight, I will say that. He loses that fight to DDP, then he picks up one kind of boring decision win over Paulo Costa, and now he's talking about how he's sitting out, waiting for the title shot. If they told him he'd have the shot, fine, but I just feel to say you're not going to fight a Robert Whittaker, to say you're not going to fight again because you're going to sit on your spot after one decision win over Paulo Costa, who's not even a top contender, for me, that doesn't make a ton of sense. And so if someone's going to act like that, they're going to just pretty much, squat on their spot, and you're going to have Khamzat Chimaev go out here, pick up a monster win over Robert Whittaker. I think Khamzat deserves that fight. Also, just from a fan perspective, a stylistic perspective, I would prefer to see Khamzat Chimaev take on DDP. I know the DDP Strickland fight, the first one was kind of fun, but still personally, I do just prefer that Khamzat fight. The question here for Khamzat, though, is can he stay healthy? Is his immune system going to hold up? And then also, what is his travel situation like? Because we could have a problem here where he's not able to get into a country where they want to book that fight. So that is somewhat concerning. But if the UFC can get some sort of quick turnaround here for Khamzat, keep him active, hopefully the health holds up here for him. That is the fight I want to see. I want to see him challenge for that title. Now, looking at Robert Whittaker, seems like he's probably going to have to take some time off here, heal the jaw/teeth, whatever that injury was. And this is kind of a tough spot for Whittaker here because a win over Khamzat Chimaev could have set him up for a title shot. Now it seems like he's at least a couple fights away. And when you look at this middleweight division, there's not a ton of names that make a lot of sense. Like, you have a lot of guys that have kind of been hanging around this division, sitting, lower than him in the ranks. The guys like Marvin Vettori, Jared Cannonier, Brendan Allen, Roman Dolidze, Paulo Costa. Like, none of these fights seem super intriguing. A lot of those guys coming off of losses. And then even some of the younger names like a Nasruddin Imavov, Caio Borralho, like, those could be potential matchups, but are those guys going to wait around for Whittaker to get healthy here? I don't know if I have one clear name at this point. I do think the names I threw out, Imavov, Borralho, that could make sense. Like, Whittaker could be their one fight to kind of get them into a title shot, although at this point it does seem like the division is a little bit backed up. Then looking, I guess, towards the bottom of the rankings, you have a guy like Anthony Fluffy Hernandez, who just had a big win, so maybe they want to leap him up in the rankings. But right now, I'd probably say it's between Imavov and Borralho, but I still don't feel great about either of those matchups. Like, for Whittaker, I feel like he's a pretty big name, exciting fighter. You want to see him in these big fights, and like, neither of those seem super exciting to me. Maybe you guys feel differently, but that's kind of my thoughts there on Robert Whittaker. Now, looking at the winner of the Ankalaev-Rakic fight, for Magomed Ankalaev here, I feel like it's time for him to fight Alex Pereira. The problem here with Ankalaev is that he has zero juice, does not have a lot of, I guess, charisma with the fans. He had that funny moment, calling out Pereira with DC, but the fighting style is not super fun. But with all that being said, like, I think the dude's earned his title shot. He's on a 13-fight unbeaten streak, and there's really just no one else at light heavyweight who could possibly slide in and take his spot at this point. Now, for Alex Pereira, it would be fun with how much momentum he has, how big a star he is, to have like a big, fun fight lined up for him. But I just don't know if there is one right now. So at this point, at light heavyweight, I think Ankalaev challenging Pereira makes the most sense. Also, for the people that I think are super scared that like Ankalaev is like this nightmare matchup for Alex Pereira, I really don't think it's that terrible of a matchup. Like, Ankalaev definitely has the wrestling to take Pereira down, but he's also not someone who consistently goes to that. So maybe he goes out there, he says, I'm just going to like freaking sprint at him, just try to take him down the entire time, and that would kind of suck stylistically. But I would not be shocked if Ankalaev goes out there and tries to stand with Pereira. I will say, though, the one way that maybe this doesn't happen is if we see the John Jones-Stipe fight later this year, and they pretty much double retire. So Stipe wins, they both retire. Jones wins, they both retire. And then you're sitting there with Tom Aspinall as the interim champion, doesn't have a clear next challenger. Then I think we could see Tom Aspinall taking on Alex Pereira for the, vacant, or they might just promote Tom Aspinall. So I think that could be a potential fight. But as of right now, I think Ankalaev Pereira is the most likely outcome. And then for Rakic here, the light heavyweight division is kind of in a weird spot. It's very booked up at this point, I guess like outside the top 5. So coming into this fight, Rakic was ranked 5th. From number 6 through number 14, only Khalil Roundtree was unbooked. So there's not like a clear next option that's sitting there, ready for a fight. You have Rakic, who is coming off of back-to-back losses, but back-to-back losses against highly ranked opponents here, Prochazka and Ankalaev. And I don't really think he performed badly in either. I think he actually looked really good in the Yuri fight. He just unfortunately is not as durable or powerful as Yuri. And then the Ankalaev fight, I mean, he was fine through 2, and then his corner just gave him like the brain dead, I guess, advice that he was up 2-0 and could kind of coast. Like, that was insane. Best case scenario, it was 1-1, and even that didn't seem super safe. So crazy questionable corner work. The third round was not pretty. I do think he's going to have to fight back at this point. And so the two potential names I have here are Carlos Ulberg or Azamat Murzakanov. Both these guys kind of fresh names in the light heavyweight division. You have Ulberg, who is fighting Volkan Ozdemir. You have Azamat, who is fighting Nikita Krylov. So both guys kind of fighting veterans. I feel like if we're booking Rakic down in the rankings, you want to give one of these, not that they're young, I think Azamat's actually pretty old, but you want to give these fresher names in the division, that step up in competition. So whichever one of those guys wins, has a more impressive win, I think that could definitely be a, next spot here. I believe they're both fighting within the next month or two, kind of give them a shot at the top 5. Now, looking at the Lerone Murphy-Dan Ige fight, for Lerone Murphy, he made the Josh Emmett call out, and I think that fight makes a lot of sense. Murphy had a gutsy win. He got dropped in the first round, came back, won the second, won the third. We just saw Murphy fight back in the rankings off a win. He picked up the main event, impressive win over Edson Barbosa. Then he agreed to fight back in the rankings against Ige, who was ranked at 14. He's undefeated, 15-0-1. He is 7-0-1 in the UFC. I do think he deserves that step up in competition. You have Josh Emmett, who is coming off a win, so maybe you make the argument he shouldn't have to fight down. Vicious KO over Bryce Mitchell. That was all the way back in December, so he's pretty much going to be going on a year plus of not fighting by the time he gets booked. But I also just don't see him getting the opportunity to fight up. Like, maybe he deserves it, maybe he wants it. But looking at 1 through 5, obviously you have Ilya as the champion, then you have Volk. That's not happening. He's probably going to fight Ilya. You have Holloway. He's going to be out for a while, and he's not fighting Josh Emmett anyway. Diego Lopez, no reason for him to fight back. Yair, I guess maybe, but we've already seen that. Yair won. I'd prefer to see Yair Rodriguez take on Arnold Allen. And then Evloev is booked against Aljamain Sterling. And then Brian Ortega here, like maybe, but I feel like T-City is probably going to take a lot of time off here. And I don't think that Josh Emmett fight would be super appealing to him. So if Emmett wants to get back in the mix here, this gets him in, active in the featherweight division. It gives Murphy that step up in competition. And you could make the argument that Emmett gets a win here, then he has one big fight before he's potentially, challenging for the title again. And then I guess same thing for Murphy. He picks up a win over Josh Emmett. He might then be one win away from getting a title shot. On the losing side of that fight, I think Dan Ige should take on Giga Chikadze. I kind of feel bad for Dan Ige here. Seems like he's kind of been screwed, at least this year. He stepped up on short notice, if you remember, like hours notice, against Diego Lopez. Has a fun fight, ends up losing. I think he dropped the first 2 rounds, won the third. Then he says, I stepped up. I pretty much want to fight on the Sphere card. Pretty much was promised that opportunity. Dana White said they'd get him a fight on the Sphere card. He, of course, did not get it because as much as people like to say, that you do the UFC a favor, they'll hook you up. It doesn't always work that way, so Dan Ige does not get a fight on the Sphere card. Instead, he gets booked in Abu Dhabi against an undefeated prospect in Lerone Murphy. So I feel like Dan Ige has done the UFC multiple solids this year. He's ranked at number 14. Even though he's coming off a loss, I still think he deserves another shot within the rankings. This is also not a featherweight division where there's like a ton of dudes outside the top 15 who are like super deserving of opportunities. That's not to say there aren't guys who could get that step up, but I don't feel like this is like the lightweight or bantamweight division where like 16 through 25 is absolutely stacked and could all be competitive within the top 15. So I feel like this matchup here against Giga is fun, striking battle. He's coming off a unanimous decision loss to Arnold Allen. I will say though, if Dan Ige is going to fight back, fight outside the rankings, I think a matchup against Chepe Mariscal would be super fun. Chepe's 4-0 in the UFC, coming off a win over Damon Jackson. That type of win, I think, could definitely get you a bump into the top 15. But that's the Dan Ige matchup. And then the final fight here on the main card, we have Sharabullet getting the win over Armen Petrosyan. And I feel like the next fight here for Sharabullet should be against Kevin Holland. He's coming off a double spinning back fist KO. Can't say I've seen that one before. He's 4-0 in the UFC, has 2 finishes, 2 performance bonuses, and then 1 fight of the night. So a super fun fighter. He's getting wins, he's getting finishes, and when he's not finishing fights, they're still fun. And I feel like he's getting to the point where he's kind of approaching a shot at the rankings. If he was given a top 15 opponent, I don't think that would be crazy. I will say, if they want to push him really fast, I think a matchup against Paulo Costa could make sense. I don't think they're going to want to push him that much, but if they did, Costa, could be a potential opponent. For Kevin Holland here, I mean, this is a striker versus striker matchup. You have Sharabullet, who I think it makes sense to give him that shine against Kevin Holland. Seems like the UFC is high on him, could be a potential future star. And then you have Kevin Holland, who's a big name. He'll fight anyone. I think this could be one of those fun fights he'd be willing to take. The questions here with Shara are, can he actually fight in the United States? I know there's some question marks with that. Pretty sure he only has one working eye. I believe he's come out and said that he's fine to fight in the US, but who really knows how that's going to go. But I do think that this is just a matchup that makes a lot of sense for both these dudes. If Shara wins, his star power is going way up, probably leads to a shot at the top 15. If Holland wins, he continues to just operate as a BMF, and this win would also get him, a lot of credibility. And then the final guy here, Armen Petrosyan. I have him booked here against Cedricus Dumas. This was a fun fight while it lasted. Petrosyan's had mixed results in the UFC. He's 3-3. Dumas is 3-2. I will say though, Petrosyan has faced the much tougher competition. His losses have been to Caio Borralho, Rodolfo Vieira, and then Sharabullet, and he has solid wins over Gregory Rodriguez, RoboCop, and then also against Christian Leroy Duncan. So I feel like this is a step down for Petrosyan. It's a step up for Dumas, who's coming off a win. Obviously, not the two biggest names here, but I think the matchup makes some sense. So that's going to wrap it up for my matchmaking for all the main card fighters from UFC 308. Let me know your thoughts. Do you like these matchups? Do you have some other ones you want to throw out there? Would love to hear them down below. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.